Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are calling from. My name is Govinda, and I'm the Senior Technical Advisor with IDEAL. I'd like to welcome you to this session entitled Fostering Social Cohesion, the Role of Social Networks in HDP Coherence. This session is the second of the first thematic area of IDEAL's knowledge sharing series, advancing locally led HDP coherence. Before we start, we'd like to inform you that this session will be recorded and that we are providing simultaneous interpretation in French. I'd like to invite everyone to select their preferred language for this session. You can do so by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting either English or French. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. At any time during the event, if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat box feature. In today's session, participants will hear two lightning talks. The first one by our colleague, Simon Buoni, from the national non-governmental organization Nile Hope in South Sudan. And the second one by our colleague, Edouard Buina, from the ViMPlus project in Burkina Faso. Then our colleagues from CARE and REAL will discuss their recent research on informal social protection networks in Yemen. And finally, we'll invite all of you audience members to interact and share your own experiences. As the programming considerations for HDP Coherence note that is foundational for this series states, strengthening social cohesion is one of the ways in which peace building can be integrated across all types of assistance. Social cohesion is the fabric of the society, which keeps individuals, family, and groups connected despite social, cultural, economic, and the political differences. Despite those differences, coming together and working together for mutual benefit in good faith is an ideal scenario of social cohesion. So understanding, supporting, and building social networks are key to the social relations and the connectedness. So in today's discussion, we'll be looking at social networks as a social connectedness dimension of social cohesion and how that contributes to the HDP coherence. With that, please join me in welcoming our first lightning talk presenter. Simon Buoni is the head of programs for national non-government organization Nile Hope. Is based in South Sudan. Simon, and if you would like to follow the presentation in French, please click on the link in the chat. If you haven't done so yet, don't forget to select your preferred language by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting either French or English. Without delay, over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, IDEAL team, my colleague from other countries, my colleague Erickson and World Vision in US. My name is Simon Bonch. I'm the head of the program for Nile Hope. Go ahead, second slide. Nile Hope is a national organization that was registered in 2004, but it started operation in 2005, which provide both the humanitarian and the development assistance to the vulnerable community in South Sudan, in out-reach area. Our Temasek area, we are doing food security, health, nutrition, water hygiene and sanitation, peace building and conflict mitigation, education in emergency and developmental. We also engage in activities activities in the Republic of South Sudan. Go ahead. South Sudan has 10 states and 3 administrative areas. Out of 10 states, Nile Hope is operating in 6 states, which I've mentioned, and in about 13 counties in the Republic of South Sudan. That is our geographical coverage. Go ahead. Our key donors and partners that we are operating with, one is the USAID, EU, World Vision, UNICEF, UN POW, Save the Children Concerned Worldwide, and we are also operating in collaboration with the line ministries in the Republic of South Sudan, and with also Relief and Rehabilitation, which is the humanitarian wing for the humanitarian community in South Country, full funds that give support to both international and the national organizations in the Republic of South Sudan. Go ahead. Our humanitarian context in South Sudan, one of the things when you look at the slide on the left is the flood affected community. Which cause displacement. What we are doing here, proactivity humanitarian need due to the conflict and climate change of the project in high level of food insecurity in the country. We also have a household mechanism to eradicate food. We also look at the displacement and the lack of productivities due to the flooding. We also look at the conflict and internal conflict due to the ethnic division between various ethnic groups, and also we look at the constant market access and high food price in the volatile area of South Sudan. This is the humanitarian context in the Republic of South Sudan. Next slide. Our social network, which is the core reason why we are having this call today, is that we are looking at the local leaders, the existing ones that are existing in the community where we are operating. We also look at the police support from the background and from the other partners which are international. We have a police which are existing in the counties where we are operating in. We have a women and youth program. We also do a fees committee. This is a project initiative, especially in and Nasser with the support from. We also have a fear group. It is also a project initiative. We also have a faith leaders, which is an existing social network we have within the community. We also have a community development committee. Is also an existing structure that we have in the community. We have serving groups which comes at the parts of income generating activities. It is a project initiative. We also have community management and disaster risk reduction committee, which is also a project initiative. We also have a protection group, which is also a project initiative. All these are a part of social networks that we are doing in line to the humanitarian development and peace. Next slide. The social cohesion activities, if you look at on the left, you will see some sports activities. You will also see a quiet sinking in front. Those are the people that those are the activities which help us to understand the linkages between the humanitarian development and peace in the countries where we are operating with our counterpart World Vision. The first one is on the sports for social cohesion, which you can see with the pictures. We also have a community dialogue peace conference. We also have a disaster risk reduction and early warning for the early action. We conduct a community awareness on early warning and early action for mitigating effect of shocks. We also look at the community-led natural resource management, because the area where we are operating, it is at the border of South Sudan and Ethiopia, and it is also bordering Jonglei and Upper Nile. We also look at youth peer-to-peer support groups, which facilitate the social cohesion among the community within the Republic of South Sudan. We also facilitate a conflict resolution and peaceful cohesion dialogue among the communities within the counties that we are operating, with that support from World Vision and BHA. Next slide. When you will look at the humanitarian development and peace coherence, divided into 3 slides. There is a slide on peace. There is also a slide on humanitarian. There is also one on the development. If you look at peace, which we say it is very important, and how is it connected to humanitarian and development? We look at the community dialogue and peace conference, which will involve the humanitarian assistance delivery to the affected communities. For example, we do agro inputs, mobile clinic. We also do a primary health care centers, primary health care units, and one-stop center for gender-based violence survivors. If there is no fees, then we cannot do those humanitarian activities. On the development part, we look at the youth empowerment through income-generating activities. We do early warning system on conflict mitigations at the feast activities. We also do community awareness on peaceful coexistence and live in harmony. We also do a training. We train beneficiaries on early warning and early system on how to live in peace, and how is it connected to the humanitarian. With all this awareness, we will be able to give services to children under fight, which are malnourished, because when we look at the food insecurity in South Sudan, some of the counties, people are going without food. We also, if that happens, we can also do a construction of a semi-permanent structure and health facilities. We can also do a catch distribution and inputs as an agriculture. We can also provide watch activities. And on the development angle, if such things are happening, we will be having a village serving and loan associations, which will help the vulnerable community to become a self-reliance. Next slide. With working with the social network challenge, I will talk a little bit here, but I will ask my colleague Erickson, from Chief of the Party from the World Vision, to come in shortly. The blow, if you look at the pictures, you see there are a training that is being conducted, a face mask, and the one of the prevention to COVID-19 as the global pandemic. We said there is a high demand for incentive due to the limit of farm employment opportunities in the Republic of South Sudan. We also look at inadequate network coverage, affected community, and coordination with social network, because in some counties or in some areas there is no mobile network, and it is very difficult for you to do a social network. That is one of the challenges. The third challenge is working environment is not secure, because the youth whom we are now telling them peace is very important are the one that is having a rifle, they are having guns. So sometimes it will be also difficult for the humanitarian community to work in peace. But we are trying our labor base with our counterpart World Vision to make sure that people live in peace and harmony. There is an issue of transportation constraint to reach a remote location to ease the coordination. Because if you look at the infrastructure in South Sudan, it is not well developed like the other countries. And also air transport is very expensive. Second slide. With this, I will give chance to my colleague Erickson to give a few words, and also to add back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Simon, for this insightful presentation. I'm Erickson. I work with World Vision South Sudan in the capacity of Chief of Party for the Access Project. and ACCESS stands for Accelerating Recovery and Resilience in South Sudan. So we are working with Nile Hope as part of our localization agenda. So Nile Hope is one of the key partners we have. And through the ACCESS project, we are engaging with two local partners, Nile Hope and another one called HDC, Humanitarian Development Consortium. So Nile Hope is contributing to the second project pillar, which entails strengthening community cohesion through disaster risk management, peace building, gender-based violence, and also mental health and psychosocial support. So Nile Hope works is basically aligned with our strategy of strengthening community cohesion. And for sustainability purposes, Nile Hope is engaging with community structures. I think Simon has outlined a number of community groups or social networks that they are collaborating with. So their role, or our role as a consortium, is to facilitate, community dialogue through either peace conferences, sports, drama, and many other approaches to basically bring the community together to discuss about issues affecting peace in their community. And what is unique about the context we are operating in is that Ulang and Nasir counties, I'm currently connected from Ulang County. There are still two counties that where we still have the opposition forces and also the government forces. At central level, we have the transitional government composed of all the parties, involved in the conflict. But again, on this side, there are so many issues related to cattle raiding, intercommunal violence, as well as revenge killing. So through this project, we are basically trying to work with the local leadership as well as community leaders to basically, strengthen harmony at community level. I think Simon has already discussed about challenges that we are facing, mostly related to the hardship context that we are operating in. I think without further ado, I'll just turn the microphone to the moderator. I will chime in for any questions later. Thank you, and over to you, Govinda.
Thank you so much, Simon and Erickson, for your great presentation and sharing. We'll now spend next 10 minutes or so answering questions from the audience. So audience, please write your questions in the chat, or if you are comfortable asking your question verbally, please raise your hand. We have 10 minutes or so for the question and answer for this presentation.
Hi, I don't know if you will allow me to speak. I didn't know how to raise my hand otherwise. I'm Gun Eriksson Skog from Suda, where I work at the Africa Department, more particularly with West and Central Africa as an advisor in market development and employment. And thank you so much for this presentation. Both of you, it's interesting to hear about your experiences and the challenges. I'm wondering whether, in order to promote livelihoods and employment as part of these processes, have you any experience from, or have you tried working with social networks or building social networks sort of based more on private sector actors, like, for example, producer groups, market actors, traders, perhaps particularly among smallholders, informal actors, micro entrepreneurs, and so forth, or even sector working groups, business membership organizations like that. Private sector actor and market activity is, of course, key. here, and those are also networks that could perhaps be used. I don't know if there's any experience of that. I'd be curious to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Gun. Simon or Addiction, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much. Let me come in, and then my colleague Erickson will also come in. Thank you very much for the question. And indeed, if we look at the triple nexus, this question is very national and international. We are working in collaboration with the local actors within the state that we are operating in, or within the counties that we are operating in. As we speak, there are a youth center in Wulang and Nasser, which are a social network, and these are the people. During the project design, those are the people we inform, so that we get the information from them and what do they need and how these activities can be related to the problem that they are facing. So they are the people who identify the problems, and we involve them from the design of the project until the implementation and also the evaluation, because this is one of the things that we get as a part of feedback and complaint mechanism to inform our next project review. Erickson?
Yeah, thanks a lot, my namesake Erickson. It's a genuine question, basically. Yes, through this Access project, of course, Nile Hope is focusing on social cohesion, but we again have other interventions around food security and livelihoods, nutrition, as well as water, sanitation, and hygiene. All these interventions are basically being implemented by World Vision. So there are so many social networks under FSL. I could maybe name a few which we are basically collaborating with in delivering our program activities. So we are working with the seed multiplication groups, and our role is basically to form them. It's not an existing structure, so we have formed them, we have built their capacity, we have facilitated them to access some agro inputs, and the next step is to also see how they can engage in promoting peace at their community level. We also have CDCs, Community Development Committees. This is an existing structure that we have basically formed, and our role was to also strengthen their capacity in various areas, and they actively engaged in beneficiary selection process, and we are also building their capacity such that they coordinate other community structures in various program interventions. With regards to producer groups or farmer groups, they are also there, but I would confirm that they are not organized. In the next phase of this project, we are also we have already initiated a conversation with the USAID to see how our focus could be more of a long-term programming to basically facilitate market linkages and also access to finance by these, I could say, farmer groups. Then on the other hand, we do have, we conduct regularly market assessments to, of course, inform the donor reporting and also other interventions as well. At quarterly basis, we do engage in markets assessments in all the locations. And again, there are other assessments conducted through the GAM. It's another partner that has that mandate. So I think that's what I could say. But again, looking at all these social networks, there are many. And nutrition, we have mother-to-mother support groups. Under protection, we have protection committees. FSL, there are many. Peace building, we have peace committees, hygiene clubs, so many groups. Now, the conversation we are having with Nile Hope and other peace actors is basically to see how we can involve all the community structures to be the champions of peace promotion at their community level, so that it's not regarded as a only peace committee's mandate to promote that. Yeah, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon and Erickson. There are a couple of questions in the chat. So I think the partially you addressed some of Yemeni part, but Amanda is interested to hear more about the monitoring and evaluation learning approach to this project. Would you like to go quickly on this?
Yeah, thanks, Govinda. I think we can start with Shirley. I'm interested in how the staff are dealing with the stress of the situation they are working in. As you work on social cohesion with the project participants, how are you providing support to your own staff? Yeah, this is a good question. One of the approaches we are using is basically team building activities, and I also spare time, in the field. Even now, I'm connected from Ulang to basically spend time with our colleagues to hear, the challenges that they are encountering, and see how we can support them. Over the weekends, because we are staying in one compound, we normally organize some social, activities that bring us together. And again, we try to really provide timely support. Whenever they need support from us, we ensure that they are supported on time. And of course, regular field visits, at least, once in 2 months, to just check on them and also see how they're doing. Again, we have a security person who is basically based in the field. He's the one who provides regular security updates, and we are also working with the INSO and PLSO in as far as security assessments and security updates are concerned. So we are in those networks to basically get updates and plan accordingly. I think Dick has said, you mentioned food security as a problem. Does that impact on our ability to undertake manual labor and reduce output? Too often, smallholder farmers have access to barely enough calories to meet basic metabolism, let alone undertake manual farm labor. Dick, the two counties that Nile Hope is operating in, the communities here rely on regular food assistance from WFP during the lean season. From March through August, they normally receive food assistance. And given, again, the context, we also have some other issues related to flooding. But there is availability of labor, and farmers try to spend as many hours in the farms as possible. But again, when there are security incidents, these basically prevent farmers from doing their farming activities. So this is one of the hindrances. And again, as we are approaching the flooding season or the heavy rain season, then there will be displacements here and there that would most likely affect the crop production. I don't know whether that answers your question. Then Robert, under the peace building component, how have you ensured conflict analysis and peace responsiveness? I could say there are so many studies basically conducted around conflict and conflict analysis by, World Vision Security Department, but also by other partners we are collaborating with here. Most importantly, the PLSO, the contracted USAID security partner in South Sudan. They are providing very rich conflict analysis bi-monthly. So they do inform all the humanitarian partners about, the assessment findings, and we also consider the findings to plan our activities accordingly. I don't know whether
thank you.
Over.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erickson and Simon, for responding all the other questions. And if there are any more questions that you want to respond, or if there is any more questions from the audience, please put that up in the chat, and Erickson and Simon can respond to it through the chat. So without making any delay, now I would like to invite our second presenter, for the lightning talk, our colleague Edouard Buena, who is the Social Cohesion and Accountability Specialist for the ViMPlus project in Burkina Faso. So over to you, Edouard.
Okay, merci, Boganda.
Thank you, Govinda, and thank you to the team, as well as the other communication team members. I am a specialist on accountability and social cohesion in implementation of activities on food security and nutrition. Next slide. Next slide. So I want to introduce to you the ViMPlus project. That's Victory on Malnutrition Plus, which we're using to promote food and nutritional security of vulnerable populations. Sorry, I believe there's a challenge on his connection. There's a lot of echo. I don't know if that can be resolved. The objective of the project is to improve food and nutritional security of vulnerable populations in 11 communes of the Central North region of Burkina Faso. Next slide. Now, it should be noted that currently the intervention areas where we are has seen a rise of insecurity and an occurrence of terror attacks, and these terror attacks are added to these terror attacks. You have community conflicts, which causes large displacement of people, leading to internally displaced persons. And right now we have 1.8 million internally displaced persons in Burkina Faso. And when we take the Central North region, which is the project intervention area, it is currently sheltering 38% of the total number of internally displaced persons in the country. Next slide. Next slide. Who are the stakeholders and beneficiaries that ViMPlus carries out its activities with? We work with producers, we work with local institutions who manage land resources, local community systems. We work with pregnant and lactating mothers, adolescents, health facilities, and community networks. It should be noted that the targets of the project are households that are at huge risk of chronic malnutrition, as well as extremely poor households. The project targets about 85,200 households and more than 485,000 people who are directly or indirectly affected by the project's activities. And we focus more particularly on vulnerable groups, notably women and youth. Next slide. Now, what motivates ViMPlus to promote or to strengthen social cohesion in its interventions? This social network approach that is promoted by ViMPlus enables all stakeholders, whether vulnerable households, whether youth and women, to have an equitable access to the common resources and investments of the project. Now, ViMPlus decided also to promote social cohesion in our intervention area because this approach enables us to forecast and to anticipate any possible conflict that can undermine the development efforts and also promote inclusion in our intervention areas, to have inclusion of all social groups and to increase participation in development and humanitarian and peace actions. Finally, this social cohesion approach by ViMPlus enables us to facilitate harmonious cohabitation between the different communities, between host communities and internally displaced persons, and facilitate the emergence of positive common values that are necessary to living together, to development, and to peace. Next slide. Now, the four main approaches that VIM has used are as shown on the slide. So groups for promotion of social cohesion, GPCS. Through these groups, we also have community radio stations. We have a WhatsApp platform called Uliza Answers, and you also have community listening groups. Next slide. Now, during these social cohesion promotion groups, they act as platforms in villages with community leaders, religious leaders, youth, women representatives, representatives of farmers, and these groups usually conduct community dialogues within communities and also stop conflicts between farmers and herders, access to social services, conflict prevention, and others. And these groups also promote peace messages.
Help communicate peace messages in churches and in other structures. It's very important to know that the activities of this group for social cohesion are very important. Thanks to the activities in our intervening zone, there was an increase of amicable resolution of conflicts. Before, it was not the case. People used to go to the office, but with their activities, people are able to do the reconciliation at the community level. And this group helped to connect communities and people's next slide. How about community radio stations? These are community radio stations that broadcast in 11 communes, and we work with the technicians so that we can put in place other programs and of vulgarization for social cohesion. Slide. Slide. What is ULISA Answers? ULISA Answer, it's an approach that was developed in collaboration with Radio Rural International, and it's based on a WhatsApp platform that allow interactions between communities and other members. Through this particular platform, men, women, young people who do not know more about social cohesion, they use this WhatsApp platform with the technician. They ask questions, the technician analyzes the questions and send the responses to these people who ask the questions. We have to note that the community radio stations and this particular platform are very important because ULISA Answer, this is the platform that helps us answer the questions. For example, producers, 1,444 producers were able to participate and to interact on this particular platform. Therefore, the community radios and the platform play a role in terms of prevention and conflict management and social cohesion. This helps us improve the
de se retrouver, d'échanger, discuter, n'est-ce pas, des thèmes des émissions radiophoniques et également essayer de faire un plan d'action pour appliquer les connaissances, n'est-ce pas, qu'ils ont appris à travers les sensibilisations et à travers le coaching et le conseil, n'est-ce pas, des techniciens du projet ViMPlus. Grâce, n'est-ce pas, au groupe d'écoute communautaire, et nous avons pu remarquer qu'il y a eu un renforcement du leadership féminin, la réduction des inégalités et les violences basées.
We can't hear the speaker clearly.
La sensibilisation, n'est-ce pas, par l'approche pair. Il y a eu également l'amélioration des relations hommes-femmes au sein des ménages.
And there was an improvement of the relations women and men in families. Next slide, please. What were the lessons that we learned from this approach of ViMPlus? We were able to identify the factors that lead to intolerance and conflict, and that can be prelude to escalating violence. And communities can be involved in development initiatives. And we learn also that there was an inclusion in political, economic, and social participation to reduce the risk of bad behavior that can lead to violent extremism, but also the social cohesion activities that were implemented by ViMPlus have promoted nonviolent conflict prevention and management and strengthened ties between different ethnicities, religions, and the populations of different parties. We realized also that there was a sustainable social cohesion, which is an imperative to work on the factors and sources that may divide people. But also, the experience showed that women are involved in social cohesion activities and in other initiatives. Next slide, please. And this allows us to answer this question: how does conflict prevention help us prevent emergencies? We can say that thanks to radio broadcasts, peace messages, and training, the various actors are working together to find solutions to their problems. But also, conflict prevention can help manage tension between internally displaced people and prevent situations. And thanks to the activities of community, many parties that were mostly in conflict are able to talk and to participate in community dialogues. For example, farmers and elders who used to be in conflict and opposition, they are able to sit and discuss. But also, we realize that the presence and the supervision of networks of actors at the community level, notably the group of women and other groups, can prevent the aggravation of conflicts. But also, strengthened social cohesion can facilitate inclusive governance, reduce inequalities, and avoid discontent. We have to note also that conflict prevention at the local level with local structures through mediation and dialogue are those internal solutions, because the alternative solution to conflict by using the traditional modes of conflict prevention may help resolve conflicts. Slide. Thanks to what we developed, we can say that social cohesion help create trust between communities that identify, plan, and implement development actions together. But social cohesion allows conflict prevention because communities were able to put in place tools and structure to manage and regulate the access to resources. Social cohesion also is a key for Coherence HDP because it helps create networks of internal mediators who can monitor, respond to crisis, and work at the community level to prevent conflicts from escalating. But also, it helps HDP Coherence by facilitating interventions targeting the beneficiaries, may it be urgent activities and other type of activities. And other social cohesion activities with different groups. Today, ViMPlus is happy because thanks to social cohesion activities, the relation between communities and people, IDP, are positive. And with the project, we are able to do our community mobilization with all the stakeholders. And talk about food security and nutrition security. And we understood that the platform that we use helped resolving main conflicts, because it was not easy to access to some villages, but thanks to the tool, there were some interactions between the beneficiaries and us, and we are able to do sensitization through the platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Edward. Let's open it up to some questions from the audience. Once again, please include your questions in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function. Yeah, just to save the time, we have one questions questions from the audience. How are you able to monitor social cohesion and tensions systematically? Edouard, do you want to respond to it?
OK. Je réponds directement.
Can I answer directly?
Yes.
Alors, OK, il n'y a pas de problème.
Thank you.
L'activité de la cohésion sociale, nous avons en fait développé en fait des outils de suivi. Et nous avons une grille en fait qui nous permet de mesurer en fait le niveau de cohésion sociale.
We develop tools that help us assess the level of social cohesion, and that is based on criteria that that promote social cohesion through the capacity of the community to prevent conflict, through the level of religious tolerance, and through the level of organization of community dialogue. Those tools allow the community to do the follow-up and for us to do the same.
Je vois une question sur le chat.
I can see a question on the chat. We asked to know how the groups were formed. These groups were formed in villages, and there was our partner at Pavoko who talked to the religious leaders, to women, to young people, by showing them the importance of social cohesion and solidarity. And they accepted that in every activity at the community level, the various leaders, religious and others, women, young people, and IDPs would come up with groups, and in every corner, we selected a man and a woman to lead this community. So all the structures are represented. Do you have other questions?
There is another question. Can you tell us how you sustain the radio talk?
OK. Alors, par rapport en fait aux discussions à la radio, et lorsque
concerning radio talks, when there is a broadcast at the radio, and here, my goodness.
communautaires sont munis de téléphones Android et également de postes radio. Donc, ils ont des éléments qu'ils mettent dans la radio et qu'ils écoutent. Et à chaque instant, quand il y a une question, ils reviennent aux techniciens qui leur donnent des réponses et ça leur permet, n'est-ce pas, de faire un plan d'action. Et à chaque 2 mois, en fait, il y a un système d'évaluation.
And every 2 months, we have an assessment system that is done by the technician on all the animators at the radio station.
Alors, je vois une question. Comment pouvez-vous nous dire comment vous soutenez les discours en fait radio? Alors, par rapport aux émissions radiophoniques, alors c'est le technicien en fait de ViMPlus qui.
So the technician is the one in charge of the radio broadcasts, and he's the one to develop the content of radio talks. And no.
L'émission qui peut être en direct ou bien qui va être rediffusée à travers les ondes.
Yeah, there is last last question that I'm going to take for now, for the interest of time. It's assume that it is not all community members who understand the language. How are you communicate the peace messages? Edouard, can you hear me?
Oui, j'écoute, je vous écoute.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, there is a question.
Susan, we cannot hear clearly from the speaker.
Yeah, for the interest of time, I just want to transition to the next session. Lucien, I saw you raised your hand. Would you mind please putting your comments or the question in the chat box so that Edouard can respond to it? And there is another one, the question from Simon. Please, Edouard, respond to it in the chat box. So,
okay.
With this, thank you so much, Edouard, for your presentation and all the audience for your active listening and contribution. Now I pass it over to my colleague, Darren, for the second part of the session. Over to you, Darren.
Thank you, Govinda. Hello, everyone. My name is Darren, and I am IDEAL's Senior Specialist for Emergency Food Security. It is now my pleasure to welcome our next speakers who will lead the second part of this session. Dr. Jiyeon Kim is the Senior Researcher for Resilience at Mercy Corps and supports the REAL Award. Dr. Charlotte Heels is the Head of Program Quality at CARE International, UK. We hope that you will all had a chance to read or skim through their work on Yemen. These are available on the FSN network and will be shared again in the following this week's events. On that note, please let me turn the mic over to you, Jiyeon and Charlotte.
Thanks, Darren. I'm just waiting for Charlotte to pop on my screen. Okay, there she is. Hello, everyone. We're really excited to be joining you today. As Darren mentioned, both Charlotte and myself have been working in this space for a little while, but true to the event's name as a knowledge sharing session, we wanted to just share some of our reflections and experiences as researchers in the social networks, social cohesion space, and then devote majority of the time that we hope to hear and learn about your experiences. So we're going to change things up a little bit and keep it pretty informal with Charlotte and I chatting, and I hope that we can hear from you all in a short amount of time to hear more about your reflections about how you are considering social networks, social cohesion in the broader HDP nexus, and to hear about your challenges and reflections and lessons that you may convey to all of us. So before we turn it over to that component, Charlotte, one thing that I wanted us to reflect on is this concept of social networks as part of the broader social cohesion discussion. At Mercy Corps and through studies conducted through REAL, we've been using the term social connectedness to refer to the sum of social linkages. So those social networks on which people draw, the extent and strength of those networks and the resources that are available within them, and the nature of obligations that such networks may carry, and the reciprocity that's presumed, in terms of collective risk and mutual support. And as Govinda mentioned at the outset of our session today, these relationships are indeed a really integral part of social cohesion, and are rapidly responding to or are evolving in response to conflict dynamics and humanitarian conditions. But personally, from our work and others that I have read, we have seen that social connectedness does not inherently infer social cohesion. So indeed, in the work that we did in Yemen, through the REAL support, social linkages have been seen to be connected to kinship ties, one's place of origin or residence, or their political affiliations. And these categories are facilitating access for some, while excluding others, and are rapidly evolving. So all of that is to say is that these distinctions have made clear for us that, one must employ a different lens in terms of conceptualizing, analyzing, and programmatically responding to social networks and social cohesion. How does that resonate with your team's framing of social networks in this broader context of social cohesion?
Yeah, I mean, it very much resonates with our team's experience, I think. I mean, I completely agree. I think we have to be really careful not to just overly romanticize social networks or treat them like they're something that can just be easily leveraged for social cohesion. The word that kind of springs to mind, which I know gets overused all the time, is complexity. Social fabric is exactly that. It underpins absolutely everything. And we can't ignore social networks because they are fundamental to the reality of how people live their lives and to the power dynamics within communities, as you, I think, have already very, very articulately said. Our programming kind of has to account for that. I think we often jump to the idea of leveraging social networks because they're present. They are frequently a basis of how programming happens, particularly in the formation of groups and various other things. But programming can also be highly disruptive to social networks. And from my perspective, I think the first question that we should be asking ourselves is, how do we work alongside social networks? How do we work with them in ways that are inclusive, which avoid elite capture, which your paper really nicely talks about, but that also don't kind of damage or place undue pressure on social networks to perform functions that perhaps they were never supposed to perform. So yeah, that's sort of some of my reflections on that.
Great, absolutely. And to situate the complexity that you're speaking to right now, I would love to hear a little bit more about a recent study that you published that looked at Village Savings and Loans Association as potential modality in emergencies in Thai's governorate in Yemen. Would you share a little bit more about that work with the audience and how VSLAs may be offering an entry point for aid actors to work through and contend with, this complexities and this idea of social networks in the HDP context?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, VSLAs are a fairly classic modality, but we've at KSS National, we've been really focused on trying to develop a model that really works in protracted crisis and in emergency settings. So that involves things like the integration of cash and voucher assistance, greater preparedness components. And as you say, we recently piloted this in Thai in Yemen, with the idea that we wanted to sort of work with the kind of community themselves in order to respond to their own resilience needs, and in order to kind of develop a model that could help us bridge that kind of divide between livelihood provision, protection, and eventually promotion. This was a community that saw high levels of food insecurity, high levels of the need for negative coping strategies. What we saw was that the VSLA was successful. We saw people saving, we saw people lending, but one of the really interesting things that we saw was that previous to the VSLA being present, there was quite a significant number of people who had participated who were borrowing from other people in their kinship network, leveraging their own social networks in order to be able to make ends meet. These were communities where people are often day laborers. They have informal working arrangements that mean that it can be difficult to see out an entire month without borrowing from somebody else. And the sharing culture within the community was profound, and I think you found this to some degree as well, depleting in the face of protracted crisis. And so, from our perspective, we were sort of, we wanted to see whether VSLA could kind of contribute to addressing some of those issues. And we had combined it with cash transfer. And what we found was people were saving quite considerable amounts. They saved about 33% of their cash voucher assistance. But more to the point, they were not borrowing from others anymore and were instead utilizing the social fund aspect of VSLAs in order to give grants to others. So it really was a kind of reversal of the roles that had been previously kind of played, but by these specific individuals within this community, many of whom are widows or people who were in, precarious livelihood situation. And I think from our perspective, it was really interesting to see a classic modality of VSLAs, the social fund, which ordinarily is utilized in order to provide a kind of social protection for members, being used well outside of that. And it is one of the benefits of the VSLA model that it's defined by the community themselves, how they want to put the rules in place, how they want to kind of facilitate that. And I think from our perspective, you could see the social networks in the results that were coming out of that pilot. You could see the need for people to be able to use the cash that they were getting to be able to serve not just their immediate needs, but their social needs. And beyond that, being able to provide for others in their community who perhaps had not got access to the same response. So yeah, from my perspective, that kind of combination of work, that the community engagement, being able to understand those social networks and being able to support them on their own terms was a really important piece of that work, and one that I think came out stronger than we had anticipated.
Yeah, just picking up on some nuggets of insights that you just shared now. A lot of the findings and insights resonate quite a lot with the work that we did through the research project. A couple of points that stick out to me is first is this modality of local initiatives as being, a really promising but tricky entry points for aid actors. Allowing, the needs to be prioritized in ways that speak and resonate with community needs, tapping into responses that are happening. Because at the end of the day, the reality is when a crisis strikes or when there's a shock, community themselves are the first responders to the situations and can mobilize often than not, much more quickly and effectively than larger NGOs can. And I think the second point that really resonated with me is this interchange between external assistance and local dynamics and social networks in particular that I think we often put to the side or we believe is implied without explicitly accounting for it. So that is the fact that external assistance is allowing households to share. Share either their assistance that they're borrowing, reduce paying back debts that they have accumulated during times of hardship, or reducing the amount of debt that they have to take on. And these collectively either contributing or, changing the ways in which people are relying on one another. I think another piece of that is just the targeting aspects, right? So if targeting is not considered really effectively, that's the other side of the coin, if you will. We found that in many ways, aid is helping to establish and strengthen these relationships. But on the other hand, if aid actors are not accounting for these dynamics and we are not targeting in transparent ways or sending messages that aid cannot be shared, for example, then that can really muck up the dynamics at play. And these are dynamics and nature of social networks that I think as a broader collective, we can stand to do much more intentional thinking around. I wanted to just, pivot slightly, and as producers of these reports myself, we often, produce and focus on the clean takeaways. Here are the findings, here are the recommendations wrapped up in a bow. But I think, in a session like this, which is about knowledge sharing, frank conversations, just airing out the complexity one must navigate in a context like Yemen, no less, is just really important, I think, for a broader sector to be open about and to reflect and learn from one another. So to that end, I wanted to just give the floor back to you, Charlotte, and ask that you reflect on some of the challenges that you think a modality like VSLAs in emergencies have to contend with, and if there are any lessons that emerge for you and your broader team in navigating those complexities. I think the audience would be quite keen to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. It's a good question. I think probably the sort of two really important takeaways for me from that particular pilot was, first of all, as I've already mentioned, VSLAs belong to the community. They don't belong to care. They are owned by the community themselves, and that really does help to be able to ensure that they meet needs more effectively. And I think where we can introduce modalities that place power back in the hands of community members, keeping in mind all of the important points that you've raised about things like elite capture, that is incredibly important. But where we can be intentional about handing back power, that is one way in which you can help to address some of those issues. The other thing, which is just a credit to my Yemen colleagues, to be honest with you, is the level of adaptation that was required at various different stages within this particular pilot. We had real privileges, which included a small but meaningful amount of flexible budget. We had incredibly good relationships with the community and enough time and resource to be able to spend a lot of time with that community, which meant solving problems. It meant that when issues arose, if there was the need for the layering of additional interventions like dispute management or conflict mitigation, that could be done easily and it could be done quickly and sensitively. I would say probably in terms of kind of what are the challenges, which I think is the more interesting part of your question, a lot of humanitarian programming isn't always set up to do this kind of work. Flexible budgets, we've argued for them at various points and got them, and they are like gold dust. The amount of trust that you get from a community by being able to respond to very clear, very reasonable requests that they have made and add in activities that they have specifically asked for is massive, and shows that you're responsive to the networks that currently exist, but also allows you to address, for example, inclusion issues where you need to. So, I mean, from my perspective, if I had a wish list of things that I could ask donors for, it would be things like flexible budget lines, which was so important. It would be trying out modalities of work that allow for, greater adaptation to the needs of the communities. I mean, we have a project, a program of work at CARE at the moment called Women Leading Emergencies. The aim of that being to increase women's voice and leadership within humanitarian emergencies. And it's a modality where women decide for themselves what their ultimate aims are. We give community members an activity budget, we give them support in networking, and we do have a 5-step model which we go through with women, which includes things like a rapid gender analysis on power and participation. But we can't go to a donor and say, these are going to be your outcomes, because we don't dictate what the outcomes are. Women dictate what the outcomes are. We see fantastic outcomes as a result of many of our programs that have been done by donors who wanted to take a chance on it. And so I think a lot of donors who've been involved in it have seen really, really great results. But it's about taking that chance and accepting that maybe we have to come up with new modalities of accountability for organizations like ours to allow for that more flexible programming. But yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that I'm wondering is about your work, you know, like what lessons kind of have emerged for you about the kind of opportunities for aid actors to do better and you know, account for and work through these kinds of informal support networks.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think a lot of what you're saying really resonates with me and our team's work. And I think just one point before I share some of those recommendations is just the loud signals, having been in this social networks research space for a while now, of signals that I'm hearing from donors in particular about their real interest, commitment, of working through these informal support networks. I think there's a convergence of a lot of factors at play here in our broader sector as we try to seek out opportunities to be more locally led, to center the voices and needs of folks who are actually contending with these issues real time. And for us to figure out how we can do better. And so in my conversations with donors, there has been a lot of candid reflection of recognizing and appreciating that social networks and informal support networks and community members themselves offer a really compelling entry point, and also, you know, opportunities for true partnership. But I think the question is just the how, right? So, yeah. And I think that's why your work related to the BSLAs and you know, humbly ours, hopefully in trying to identify how we do the work, not necessarily what we do, but how we do the work, I think is offering some nuggets of insights for donors and, you know, our peers to start thinking about what are some concrete opportunities we can actually put this to practice. And I think right now that's where we are really challenging ourselves. It's like, okay, great, social networks matter. They're really critical, they're complicated, but how do we then translate some of that insight into practice? And I think for us in particular, and I'm sure you are through your work as well, Charlotte, is just being really honest and evaluate that process along the way and push yourselves into go places potentially where we have not gone before, and to advocate along the way that despite the investment that is going to require, that additional resource will matter. And I guess, you know, drawing on our work, I think there's like 3, I guess, major buckets of recommendations that emerge. First is just testing and challenging our assumptions. You know, in our work in Yemen, what often came up was when social networks are considered at all, if at all, there's a lot of assumptions that, as you said earlier, that there's this over-romanticizing that communities are super supportive of one another. Community is this like very cohesive concept where something happens and they all rally to support one another. But I mean, the reality is it's much more complicated than that. But right now, if programs are being adapted and if programs are being responsive to informal support networks, they're largely rooted based on assumptions about this cohesiveness. And we're not really accounting for or measuring or monitoring dynamics of social connectedness, exclusion or marginalization, you know, in our work. And I think this is really critical to the do no harm piece that seems really quite central to the HDB nexus conditions that we're talking about today. So I think, you know, in our lines of work, we are identifying, it does not have to be a 2-year anthropological study. There are, I think, some quicker turnaround questions one could embed into assessments, engagements with community members, to just wrap our heads around like, what does social connectedness look like? How does it manifest? What are the limits of it? And how is it shifting over time, just so that we are keeping better tabs on it and not programming based on assumptions. I think second, you know, insight that emerges is designing targeting and community engagement strategy. And this harks back to an earlier point that I made. And this is, I think, where the do no harm piece is quite central. You know, in not being transparent or being inconsistent about messaging about who is selected for particular programs versus not, especially in resource constrained contexts, we're finding that that could breed social tensions, also, create issues within the social networks that are really critical sources of resilience in contexts where there are limited resources that people can turn to. So simple things like messaging out why people were targeted, on what basis, so that people are aware about why their friends were selected, why they were not. So it helps to minimize or mitigate some of that tension. Equipping some of the community committee members with some of the conflict resolution tactics, instead of just relying on them to make these selections and then kind of leaving them to their own devices and heading off, in this effort to be inclusive. And signage about why things were being targeted to certain people, why not, and then just making sure that we are putting in steps, the foundational steps required to, at the very least, not do harm, I think emerged as a really low-hanging fruit, I think, for the broader sector. And then third, which I think is just quite central to the piece that you're speaking to with VSLAs as emerging as potential, promising modality, is just seeking out and investing in opportunities to partner with, strengthen, and support informal social protection efforts that are already happening. So I think I saw in the chat earlier about private sector investments. I mean, in Yemen, in Thais in particular, the private sector and the diaspora certainly sprung up in response to the crisis, several years back, though they're, contending with challenging times and undue pressure. And also local community initiatives who are responding to and identifying very acute needs real time is, and then self-help groups or women's groups, VSLAs, are also showing up in our work as really central entry points that we need to navigate carefully, but nonetheless, offer really important entry points for efforts that are already happening, and will also allow us to center locally led initiatives in our work. But I think that's enough from our side. I don't know how you're feeling. I wanted to just turn it back to you, Charlotte, because I think one of your colleagues is online, and we want to be hearing from likes of him, not from people like us. So over to you, Charlotte.
No, absolutely. I am a bit of a consolation prize. I do accept that. And actually, we hopefully do have Barak Kananga from Yemen on the line. So Barak, would you mind sharing some of your reflections?
Thank you. Thank you, together with our colleague from IDEAL, for the rich conversation that you've had. Okay, fine. I was being asked to start my video. Fine, thank you. So now I wanted to say that that has been really rich conversation that you've had, and I just want to compliment on a little bit of issues here and there, but at the same time also confirm some of the issues that you've said. I want to start with the confirmation. The point number one is that indeed, social linkages does not necessarily translate to social cohesion. In many instances, for example, like in Yemen, we already have these kinship linkages that are there, the kinship support system. So you would realize that social linkage in such an environment would not necessarily translate into social cohesion. Even sometimes is riskier if it is not well taken care of. It may end up disintegrating that particular community, especially where you are working with different players from different kinships. Nevertheless, we haven't seen the negative side that I'm dwelling on much. Rather, it has been very positive. And I want to specifically speak on our VSLA programming that you've heard about. And the other thing that I'd also want to mention is the entry points for social cohesion, like what are the forms of social groupings that humanitarian actors can form that can help and enhance social cohesion in the community. For instance, I listened to the part that was presented earlier by Simon from South Sudan with a little of nostalgic, because I worked there and I know how important social groups are in bringing the communities together. And then there was a question that followed up: how do we use farmer producer groups? How do we use self-help groups to enhance social cohesion? CARE as an institution in Yemen is very, very rich in terms of the work we are doing. In our agriculture program, we have those farmer producer groups, and we've seen how much they can strengthen the social cohesion in the community. We also have farmer field school, we have fisher folk field school, through which we can use to bring the communities from different backgrounds and different parts within a sub-district or a village to come and work together. And we have seen those groups strengthening that particular social cohesion. Then I listened also to that particular presentation from South Sudan, where this was very deliberate. But I want now to speak about CARE's work in Yemen, which did not have an intended outcome, like really the core, like the goal, but rather our entry was through financial access services, which you've had through the VSLAs. So there are two things. You can have an intended outcome, which is peace building and which is to enhance social cohesion. And you can have other programs that at the end of the day, they yield more unintended outcomes in strengthening social cohesion. So this is what CARE's program in ties has yielded. The project was about targeting a segment of the community who are food insecure with the support of cash transfer program. And then through that cash transfer program, alongside it, we had the financial access services, which were the VSLA activities. But through these VSLA activities, we've seen us bringing together different groups of women, different women with different backgrounds who have now come together and they are working together. And the social cohesion is being strengthened, and it is now going beyond the kinship support that you've heard from my colleague Charlotte present to a formal communal support system. The other one was informal through kinship, what you've already read in the inbox, where the kinsmen are sending money from the diaspora. But these particular VSLA groups, whose composition are not necessarily kinsmen and kinswomen, but members of the community, we've seen the sharing, like the resources that they are saving together and sharing amongst themselves, being strengthened more. So this is one advantage the VSLA initiative has brought about. And then there was the other element that was not really like one of the output for this project, but along the project life, this became an output where we build a community center. This particular community center is not just but used by the women alone, but other communal members do meet in this particular community center to deliberate matters around their community. So you can see also communal infrastructure can strengthen social cohesion in a particular community. And then the other issue that Charlotte and her colleagues spoke about in terms of targeting, I think this is where now the issue comes in. If you get targeting wrongly, then sometimes you may eat into that social cohesion because it may again tear the community. So for programmers, it is very important for you to have very, very clear targeting guidelines, very clear communication policy around targeting. You need to communicate to the community members why other members are left out, why others are put into the program. so that you avoid creating friction in a community where there is quite a lot of needs and very limited resources. Then the last thing that I'd want to as well speak in terms of the example of our BSLA in emergencies in ties in Yemen is in terms of the communication strategy between the actors. How do you communicate to the community when you are looking for participants on your program? Because that is one key area for the success. So for Yemen, we are glad that there is an organization that does conflict scanning within the community, and CARE is working with this particular organization, whereby we are able to understand the issues as far as conflict are concerned within the community. And then based on that, we also have community entry mechanism. We have the community committees that usually are used to select the beneficiaries. And then we also have the local authorities. We have the religious leaders who as well help in community mobilization. And of course, CARE as an institution has set out very clear targeting criteria, which through this mechanism of the community committees, the local authorities together with the religious leaders, we make our entry into the community. So you realize that we resolve a lot of conflict long way before we do the targeting and selection of the beneficiaries. So I would stop here. Perhaps there's anyone with a question they would want to weigh in and or add something. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barak. John, I know that you've got some framing questions for the group. So if I can pass back to you, that would be great.
That'd be great. Thank you so much, Barak, for your rich insights. I think for me, there's a lot of nuggets to glean from that, but intentionality seems to be a very key theme in terms of intentionally programming, accounting for these social connectedness outcomes that are often, implied or just assumed to be happening or not taken into account at all. And then thinking about how we program in these contexts to account for social connectedness and networks to make sure that we're not doing harm. And those points really resonate with me. So thank you so much. As Charlotte said, we are keen to hear from you all. We have shared our reflections about what's going on, what we think we should be doing, but we would love to hear from you all about how you have considered informal support networks or social connectedness in your line of work in the HDP nexus, what challenges you're contending with, how have you navigated this? And for those who are appreciating social connectedness as a concept, but have not really forayed into that, what's stopping you? And are there opportunities that are popping up where you could be much more intentional or explicit about your consideration of social connectedness in your work, and are there opportunities to collaborate? So either raise your hand. I think you do that by clicking the reaction button on the bottom of the bar, or popping a comment into chat or reaching out through private message to Darren to just let yourself be put in the queue. We would love to hear from you. I see, is it, forgive me if I'm butchering the name, but is it Mezabin? Would you mind? I see your hand. Go ahead. And please introduce yourself and where you are, just so that we all get to know each other.
Hello, it's good evening from Bangladesh. It was really nice discussion, and it was really nice to hear all of your works you are doing there excellently. I just heard someone from that you have intentionally targeted women to increase their resilience capacities. So in terms of inclusiveness, throughout the genders, person with disability, how did you have incorporated those into your activities? That was my question. Thank you.
Charlotte, do you want to take that one? Was your VSLA targeting women in particular?
Yeah, so we had a sort of core to the pilot that was about 300 women, and that was targeting specifically women. And then actually we did see essentially replication within the broader community, which was much broader. So there were a number of men who wanted to join. So we had both men and women in those replicated numbers, which was about 609. I say about, it was exactly 609 additional members. So yeah, we targeted women specifically, but I'll let Barak come in actually because you were specifically involved in programming. Barak, do you want to speak a little bit to how we worked with those women specifically? I mean, I know we did pieces around, women's leadership, and there were a number of sort of aspects that we did, but I think it would be good to hear from you.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte, on that. Definitely, there is usually concerns around targeting and how do we succeed to only but target women alone in a community where we have so much needs across. So basically what we did is we had worked with a section of those groups on an earlier pilot, a pilot within a pilot. So, and then you already also had, I did mention that there is really a very clear need to have a very clear entry into targeting within the community. And when there is a proper awareness creation within the community stakeholders, who include the religious leaders, who include as well the local authorities and the community committees, it becomes very easy to go into the community and let them know that we are deliberately targeting women, and the reason we are targeting women is ABCD. And for our case, it was easy to target the women because we had worked in that particular community before, and the results of our previous work was very much encouraging. So when we had the resources to run this pilot in a broader manner, it was quite easy to go to the same community and speak to the local leaders, speak with the community committees, at the same time speak with the religious leaders who also communicated to the community that indeed the participants in this particular project were largely to be women. But as we speak today, they are not just women alone. We also have men who have joined this particular program, and it is self-sponsored. It is now, I would call it, it has replicated, it is working by itself without necessarily external resources as of now. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the message really coming out, which from you there, Barak, and but also from what you previously said, Shion, is communication, and it's certainly what the team have fed back through the research over and over again, the community particularly, being able to have a functioning working relationship with the community at large. And I realize that makes them seem like a monolith, and they're not a monolith, but understanding those dynamics and being able to interact with them sensitively is so vital to being able to do that targeting effectively.
Absolutely. It looks like Georgia, you're up next. I'm gonna go off and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. I will just put my camera on for 5 seconds so you know I'm a real person. It's just not strong bandwidth at the moment. Yeah, so my name is Georgia Tacey. I work for Save the Children International in Iraq, and I am the director of a Nexus consortium along with our partners CARE and NRC and HI. And I just thought it might be useful, really in support probably of what Barak and Charlotte were saying around when we're running multi-sector Nexus programming, how there is unintended consequences of social cohesion outside of standalone peace building and social cohesion programming. Our donor was quite specific about, alongside our livelihoods, WASH, health, protection, legal services programming, that they wanted a standalone peace building and social cohesion component. And we're working in northern Iraq, particularly right now in Sinjar, post-ISIS conflict and the genocide of the Yazidi people. And it may come as no surprise that people did not want to turn up to peace and security forums and social cohesion dialogue groups with people and their neighbours that only, a year before had turned on them and handed their families over to ISIS. And so it was just so inappropriate to think that that's the stage the community would be at when they're not getting their basic needs met. And so whilst that's a lesson that most of us don't have to learn, it was very, the donor was very stuck in wanting to approach it that way. And we're lucky they are very flexible, and we did change our approach. But one of the most successful components of our program was establishing the WASH committees and coalescing a very diverse group of people around one common need. They didn't have much desire to get along as a community or to really build relationships. Everyone needed water, and everyone wanted to make sure that their community and their ethno-religious group had access to all the humanitarian aid coming in. So really being able to have, Yazidis and Sunni and Shia and Turkmen and Kurds, people with disabilities, a very diverse group of people around to identify WASH needs and to allocate resources, and trained in how to advocate up to donors and to government about where the gaps are, and with a bit of a flexible budget to address some of those community-based WASH needs. After a year of working together, people sitting in a room next to people that they would not have crossed the street for a year later, now really problem solving together as a community, designing community-based rehabilitation programs for ethnic groups that they've been warring with for centuries, setting up small engineering teams made up of different ethnic groups to go house to house to do WASH campaigns. Really, the social cohesion outcomes of that particular group was an unintended consequence, but also something that we have now been able to build on and be able to give them bigger budgets and a bigger remit. So now they're in a position where they do want to hold social events and recreational events for their community and put on particular women's days and bring different religious groups together, which would never have happened a year or two ago if we just spoke about this community needs to get along, there needs to be more peaceful coexistence. And it's a bit of a no-brainer, but sometimes we forget when it's at design stage and there's donor interest that may not necessarily be appropriate at the time. But I would say it has been one of our most powerful and encouraging outcomes of this program, that we reverse engineered some social cohesion and some peace building, that we now have a bit of a Trojan horse, a vehicle to continue building upon, to broaden it out from, community-based WASH activities to more social and political engagement. So it was really more just reflecting and endorsing what Barak was saying about that having standalone peace building and social cohesion programs are not always the most impactful or appropriate. So yeah, that's all for me.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Is there something written up about your experience there? I think there would be a lot of interest, certainly from my side, to just learn more about what it looks like to, more intentionally program around this and account for it, and what resource demands there may be. So if you're able to share into the chat anything that you have written up or documented, even if in an informal capacity, I think people will be quite keen.
Sure.
I would also really love to ask you, because obviously, there's this sort of piece about, well, we may well see unintended consequences of our work and see social cohesion coming about, but there's also an intentionality around wanting to monitor that, right? And it sounds like you might not have been expecting that you would have seen this degree of work, but you were able to see that it was occurring, and therefore you were monitoring that this was happening. And I guess from a kind of, in terms of sort of how we work in these kinds of contexts, yes, it doesn't necessarily have to be full-blown by itself piece programming. That I guess I'm interested in how you integrated some of those pieces and the sort of pieces into the kind of framework of WASH that you were putting together.
Yeah, and I think there was quite a lot of intentionality around it, but our best case scenario at the time when we first started was do no harm. Let's just be conflict sensitive about how we do this, not try for particular social cohesion outcomes. But I think what was most encouraging is the leaders in the group were the first to notice it. Obviously, people speaking a range of dialect, we're not as sensitive to when people use certain tones or words that are more offensive than others. It was the leaders in the room that would come to us saying, well, this is unheard of. Even before the war, we didn't have this group of people sitting around a table. So once that started, we were resourcing the group more, providing more training, providing them bigger budgets to give them a sense of agency to do more of it, so it didn't kind of fizzle out. It was probably the cheapest part of our intervention and the easiest part. You know, we often think that they're really sophisticated, highfalutin, legal-based human rights peace-building programs, and I think there's a lot of success in just being pragmatic and looking at what communities need and moving yourself out of getting out of the road, basically, so they can get on and do it. So I will share what information we have, and really happy to talk about it with anyone further.
Thank you so much. As per usual, you are running short on time. So I think there's two hands up. Let's give, if you're able to just share briefly with apologies, your insights, I think that'll be great. Seika and then Lucien will wrap up with the two of you.
Thank you so much. I'll keep it very quick. My name is Saika. I work with World Vision in Bangladesh, specifically on the Noble Jatra project, which is a resilience food security activity working in the southwest part of the country. So we work with VSLAs throughout the life of our project, and really they are a form of social solidarity. You know, they give access to finances, access to formal financial services, but really they serve as a hub for information on, you know, gender-based violence, on nutrition, WASH, so on and so forth. We've had to pivot over the last 3 years to a number of emergencies. In addition to COVID, we've had 2 cyclones and a flood. And really these VSLA groups have shown us just how important they are as structures on the ground when it comes to providing much needed solidarity, especially when members are, you know, backsliding into poverty because of these back-to-back crises. One of the ways we've seen that our VSLAs, and I know there was this conversation about VSLAs voting to provide community members with funds, but what our VSLAs have done is they specifically put aside social funds where they vote on, you know, members who have lost everything, who need you know, access to finances to be able to revive a livelihood or pay healthcare costs or just for immediate, you know, household consumption. We found that our VSLAs also became this really important hub for information on government relief packages, social safety nets, how to access them, what was the criteria, and people really came to these VSLA groups to access as much information as possible in terms of how they could survive, you know, when everything was lost after the cyclones and the floods. And in terms of reaching really the community level and the socially excluded, whether it's the destitute or widows, poor, extreme poor, we found that our VSLAs have consistently been the most reliable platform to be able to reach these people with information and services. I'll stop there, and I know we're running out of time, so over.
Thank you so much, Saika. I think people in these groups are not contending with humanitarian assistance versus development assistance. When a situation strikes, they're responding. And I think, Shani, this gets to some of your question too about, you know, VSLAs offering this really natural and promising opportunity to be layering and sequencing and integrating HDP programming, as both Georgia and Saika's example illustrated. Lucien, you'll have the final word. We're turning it over to you before we wrap up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the excellent presentations. I just wanted to share a challenge that I witnessed. I work in ACD VOCA in Burkina Faso in the central north. We are in a resilience program in a very difficult context that witnesses violent extremist activities. And most of the population in our intervention areas are really hesitant. Everyone is afraid of their neighbors because you cannot know who's a violent extremist and who is safe. And in such context, ViMPlus and ACD VOCA is difficult to put in place in a social network if people are wary of their neighbors. And the first thing for us, we needed to reconstitute groups to enable people to be able to speak as neighbors and to speak with their leaders. But the challenge that we have is that there are groups that have multiple problems. We have groups where participants who have development needs, and other groups where members need humanitarian assistance. And in other groups, you just have participants who need social support. For them, maybe they need peace. And in such situations, we have a package for humanitarian activities, for development, and for peace. The challenge for us is now how to keep these groups as stable networks in a balanced manner so that they can function over time. And when we share our experience, there is a category of participants that we call internally displaced that have networks that are external, and that is a challenge for us. And in summary, we have three challenges. First, sustainability of groups with different types of participants and needs. Two, resilience packages for the different groups. And three, sequencing of activities so that at different times, the different participants can be able to have their needs catered. That's what I needed to share in terms of the challenges. And for those who have the same challenges, we can share so that we see how to sustainably resolve this. Sometimes where we work, there are several problems because you can constitute a group for a specific goals, but if you manage it badly, we cannot solve the problem that you initially intended to solve. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, Lucian. You're keeping us honest and making us reflect on the real challenges of working through and trying to support these groups in the really challenging context we're operating. And so I really appreciate your call to learn from each other and continue this conversation, because clearly there's a lot that we can learn from one another in our experiences. So I invite us all to continue speaking, and Darren, maybe you can help us figure out how we go about doing that. But over to you for final wrap up.
Great, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Edouard, Simon, Erickson, Gian, and Charlotte for your contributions and for being a part of this journey with us. We're at time, but before everyone leaves, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this session so we can improve on our future events. We shared in the chat box a short survey. It'll take less than 2 minutes to complete. Also, if you haven't done it so yet, please register for tomorrow's session. We're going to be hearing from local partners from Kenya and the Philippines who will share how they've enhanced local leadership in their context. So we're going to keep the Zoom meeting open for just a moment. We'll play some music in the background as you complete your survey. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Goodbye.